and it'll toss all of you guys a consent. Cool. All right, let's get into it. So, as always, people send in topics that they have via the Eventbrite or via email directly to me. So I have that list. But feel free to riff off of anything, take it in a tangent, discuss anything else. I'll try to keep us on track if I feel like we're veering too much off, but the purpose of this forum is to have a discussion, so I don't want it to be too rigid. All right. In the interest of time, we won't go through and do introductions from everybody, but when it's the first time that you've spoken, feel free to do an introduction. This is a great place, hopefully, for everyone to meet each other and network as well. Okay, I'll kick it off. I don't think Alex is here yet, but so I'll skip his question in case he's able to join for now. But I believe Anupama, I think you put this question in, but it's a great one, which is, how can we make features, products, experiences more user-centric amid some of our companies experiencing maybe cost-cutting or delivery pressures that teams might be under, or especially design might be under?
Yeah. Can you hear me? My Zoom is acting up, though.
Yes, we can hear you. And I believe there's two of you, actually, but we can hear you.
Sorry.
No worries.
I'll try and get out of the other in a minute. Yes, I did put that because I kind of the last couple of years, it's been a lot of cost cutting going on, and yet it's more of delivering something to reach the business goals. And therefore, as I'm a user researcher, there's a lot of compromises we have to do as user researchers, and then it disables a lot of organizations from being user-centric, because there's some targets to reach. That's one perspective. The other perspective is somewhere someone decides that this is the cost-cutting way of doing our work. For example, internal, suppose we want to change it to Microsoft Dynamics, all of it, or whatever tools we want to. So somewhere someone decides it, and then you kind of want to ask the people around the organizations of what they think, and possibly they do not agree to the overall idea, and then there's a clash. And it's in keeping with the business goals and also the user goals. How do we put together? I don't think either is wrong, but how do we match them together? Because business also has to get over the difficult times. So it's in keeping with both. That kind of more my question.
Anupama, that's a great question. Do you have a specific example from your past where you had to make that trade-off? Maybe that will help us anchor in an example.
Couple of it's kind of somewhere people have decided that this is the tool, and especially with internal tools, it's a top-down approach to how the business should go ahead, that this is the tool we are going to adopt, or somewhere it's already strategized that we are going to buy Microsoft Dynamics or some other tool. And then you do the internal user research, and you see that internally there are a lot of things not working. So it is not just about internally giving tools, and this is actually going to open up a lot of more worms that I want to talk about. But it's being user-centric is understanding users' problem. And just a tool is not the solution to everybody's problems, especially with internal user research. There's a lot more going on. There are a lot of power dynamics, a lot of internal negotiations of top-bottom layers of the organization trying to match their interests, and that is where a clash comes. And that is where I faced a clash, that somebody decided, okay, we are going to use the dynamics. And the internal people said, no, it's not going to work because the tool we are I think they were using Excel. And that's what they wanted to continue with because that solved their problems, and bringing in something else wasn't going to solve their problem. There's a fear of that it will create chaos, and there was also internal misunderstanding of we are not included in that decision making. You're just giving us the tool and asking us to adopt it. And that's why I said it will open up a lot more worms, because user research is basically academic research where you kind of say users and participants are not lab rats. That's why it's participatory research. But then if you're deciding somewhere and asking them to give feedback so that thing works, that's also kind of not being user-centric. So I think that's the best, without giving names, that's the best example I can give. I think that's what I had to say.
Thank you, Anupam. I'm sure, I think everyone is just digesting maybe what you were saying. So we can give everyone like 30 seconds or so to see if there's any responses.
Somebody has a hand on.
Yeah, I guess a couple stray thoughts to maybe kick us off. I was just talking to a mentor of mine about a similar topic. And it was revolving around just like organizational buy-in on research, design, sort of that kind of advocacy. Luckily for my team and I, we're still a small team and we can build this into the structure. It might be a little bit harder if it's like an established culture, et cetera, that you're trying to then like reroute. One that this great team, Unite Us, JJ over at Unite Us and their user researcher have done a really good job, I think, changing that culture for themselves, which was they actually built out a set of very robust personas. And say what you will about personas and their efficacy, I think everyone has different opinions about how to use personas, myself included, but they built out this set of like pretty robust personas, added like specific clients that were clients that represented those personas, like had your classic persona things. And then they divided them based on what products were relevant, and then got the buy-in of those product managers to print out the personas in a very visible place in their office, so that people started like revisiting those personas for every decision. Like, okay, what would like the, Jane Smith persona say about this? How would we design for the Jane Smith persona? And they were very specific. So it's like, for your product, this was your persona. And they mentioned that they actually turned the culture around quite a bit, so that it was really top down in the sense that decisions had the framing of the personas in place, so that they were always thinking about what would be best for the user, what would be best like for this particular like use case or this particular group of people. I don't know if that directly addresses what you're talking about, but it does seem like, changing decision making does come from changing like a perspective on that kind of buy-in. Oh no, Anupama, we lost your audio. Nope.
Angela, how do you approach personas? What is your take on personas outside of that anecdote?
I'd love to hear others as well. And Anupama, whenever you get your audio back, please chime back in. I guess I just haven't, they feel like the kind of thing where maybe the exercise to create them is useful if your team isn't aligned from the start. Like I haven't really found a situation where the personas provided anything new. Instead, it was just like it was just work to create them, and then they weren't referenced again. And I would say like in the past when I've tried to do them, they weren't referenced again because it felt like our team was aligned. Like we were very like user centric, motivated by empathy with our users and like always thinking about the users from the start already. And it didn't really help to have the personas. I also personally struggle with like how generalized or how nuanced the personas should be. Like, do you just have like one large one for this group, or do you break it down into like particular roles within this type of organization? And then you just end up having so many personas that they almost match like one-to-one to your clients. I just haven't found a right balance to be worth, like the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. Is that how the saying goes? But that's just what I've, in my experience. That's why I was so impressed with Unite Us.
I think my audio is back. Can you hear me? Yeah. I was trying to say that I completely agree to that, but in big organizations, or not big, in most organizations, people come and people leave, and a lot of knowledge is gone with the previous person. So building personas is the right approach, but sometimes those are lost somewhere. And then there's a differentiation between marketing persona and user persona. And then sometimes building them is also taking a lot of time. Like people wants to understand how is it going to increase retention. So what is the next feature we should build? They don't understand that you have to understand the user goals and user needs. And I won't say that it will be wrong to say they don't understand. I think that's a wrong way of saying it. I think people do understand, but I think everybody is under a lot of pressure to churn out work under a certain time limit. And I think we all face it, and it's not blaming anybody else that they don't understand and I understand. No, it's we all are in the same soup and we all have the same goal, but sometimes there's time constraint, and that's where my initial question was. Like, even if we all want to do it, even if we all want to understand it, how do we balance it out? And it's a step-by-step progression. It's not like in one day you can turn it all around. But I wonder if all of you feel the squeeze. Is anybody else who has similar experience?
I'm gonna assume that since someone else has hand raised. In reply, I think one thing that I've noticed that's interesting in my org, or also Russell's org, because we're both from Redox, is that we have a really great team where I don't think people, especially the technical side, like engineers, are pushing to create something that's like very dogmatic. Like they're very understanding and they're very willing to hear the designers out about what we think we should make based on user feedback and like the personas that we have. But it's a really interesting conversation when they're really on board until they have to do feasibility, and then there's like that external pressure of like budgeting, time constraints, like other business requirements. And so I think it gives us a little bit more leeway to negotiate and bargain. So I can definitely see like the worst cases, like when you can't just bargain at all and you don't really have empathy or buy-in from anyone else. But I think there is still an obstacle, even if the other party is very understanding and wants to commit to the vision that you have, that sometimes they're also unable to. So it becomes like this very difficult game where you're trying to get buy-in from everywhere, which is not really possible sometimes or most of the time. So I'd love to hear how other people feel about that, or like their experiences with that kind of push and pull, even when the other product members or engineering members actually agree with you.
I'd be curious how have others in this group used evidence or data or calculations on ROI to help with this scenario. It's obviously difficult to do exact ROI. You have to lay a foundation of analytics as well and be able to prove that like UX changes or research or whatever actually led to those improvements or at, you know, worst case declines in metrics. But has anyone seen or have personally done this in like a very high efficacy way?
You mean building persona and using analytics?
Yeah, like in any way. It could either be like collecting data on like key metrics that have gone up, or maybe have you been able to use like industry research or other stats, or just anything that where it's like, you know, you bring something evidence-based to the table rather than an opinion to help make a case.
I didn't, but I don't want to just keep on speaking unless somebody else has to speak as well. I want to wait.
I can speak. I don't know specifically on this kind of decision point, but I think one thing that has been really valuable in a particular case that we've had has less been about metrics than about customer feedback. So we had a case where we were going back and forth with one of our external partners about this decision point that is sort of like critically important to what we're trying to build together, but we just can't land on a common ground. Like, you know, our team has a very strong opinion, their team has a very strong opinion. So we ended up building both and just launched into joint user research sessions with some customers. And just hearing customers talk to us about those two decisions and having the two options like in front of customers and having them be very candid about like, I hate this, or this is so much better, or this and that, like has been, you know, luckily so far it's been going in our direction, but it has I think been really, really valuable just for like the vendors to stop hearing us talk about it and hear us say, this is our opinion. And to have that come directly out of a customer's mouth, I think was really valuable. And it required us to like go through the motions of like building both options and then setting up user research sessions. But sometimes it's the only way to reach a decision that's sticky.
Can I say something? I think that's really interesting. I can't believe you built both solutions. That seems like a really awesome investment. And did your team ever consider, like, it sounds like maybe in this situation, testing prototypes wouldn't have gotten the reaction that you needed from the customers? Is it that they kind of needed to feel what it was like when it was a live product?
So when I say build, I do mean like design build, like it was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you meant like build out, and I was like, wow.
No, luckily not. Luckily not. We didn't have to go quite that far, but it was detailed Figma mocks that usually we'll let customers like manipulate them. We'll just hand over the screen. In this case, we had control just because all we needed to do was sort of demonstrate the two ideas, but it was, yeah, detailed Figma prototypes.
Cool.
All right, I'm going to move us to the second topic, but I'm sure if anyone has additional thoughts, Anupama would be more than happy to receive those via comments in the chat. So feel free to continue there if you have any additional thoughts. Okay, let's see. Katie had a question here, so I will pull in Katie's question next. Katie, if you have any additional like comments to add to this, please feel free. But as it stands, Katie's question is, how can patients be more empowered by their health data? So if you have any, like, if there was like a particular angle you were asking this question from, or examples you want to provide, I think that would all be helpful to the discussion.
I think this was like a rhetorical question because I couldn't think of a question to put into the question box when I signed up for this session. And I certainly have thoughts on this I'm a patient myself with autoimmune issues, and that's sort of my identity is like I'm a designer and I'm also a patient. I've worked in healthcare product and service design for about 12 years now. But yeah, I'm just curious, like I just wanted to hear from other people, what does this conversation come up of patients being empowered by their health data in your setting? And what are the conversations you hear about that? I think there's surely a lot of lip service to we want patients to own their data. We want to empower patients when at the end of the day, often that isn't what actually happens. So yeah, just curious to hear what others think about that topic. Like, where you all work, like, do people care if patients are empowered by their data, or is that just like not even a discussion? I know some of you are working in maybe more of like a clinician facing product or something like that. Julie.
Yes, hello. So I'm actually working in healthcare right now, and I'm transitioning over to product design. So maybe my answer to you might be a little bit redundant, but I used to work at a urology clinic, and a lot of times, like traditionally, whenever a patient goes to see their doctor in an outpatient setting, they don't always get a after visit summary or sort of like a hard copy of basically everything that they sort of went through during their visit. So they forget a lot of their things, like when their next appointment or next plan of action is. And so a lot of the patients would ask for it afterwards, but the clinic still didn't advocate to create sort of I don't know if you've been to a health system where they give you sort of like AVS, after visit summary, through my chart or something. But yeah, the clinic didn't really advocate or try to pull up the information that would help patients remember their next plan of action. So there is that. But in bigger health systems, I've seen that a lot of patients, you really appreciate the after visit summaries, in order to benchmark their blood pressure or something of their health conditions that's long-term or chronic. It's really helpful for them. So that's the way that I've seen the two different ends of it work. And I have seen some patients also just disregard it completely, and they don't even want to read it because they'd rather hear it come from the clinician's mouth instead.
Anupama, feel free to go ahead. I won't call names, but if you see yourself pop to the top, go for it.
Hey, sorry. My Zoom is really acting up, so I can't see a lot. Apologies for today. I think it depends on the context. I've worked a lot with marginalized groups, sex workers in India, and for them, empowering them with information. What does empowerment mean? It's more of me understanding empowerment rather than them understanding empowerment. And it doesn't work for them. It didn't work for them. I also worked with sex workers in England, and it was kind of same. In England, everybody can access the National Health Service, but there even the sex workers said when we go to the doctors, when we go to the nurses, they treat us differently. So them giving us information didn't make sense to them. And it also depends on the context. Some people are really empowered when they actually want to know and have access to that data, but some people don't know what to do with the data. And some people kind of are told what empowerment is, and they don't have an understanding of that. They just think differently. And I feel it more about the context than whether patients feel empowered with the data, but I don't deny it that they do feel it, as my previous speaker spoke about it. I agree to her, but there's also a flip side to it.
Hi guys, I'm gonna introduce myself really quick because this is my first time. I'm Pranati, I'm based in SF. I'm a product designer at a small stealth health tech startup. And Katie, I thought your question was super interesting. I think from what I've seen, the fine line that you kind of have to toe with empowering patients with their data is to like give them the information but not really stress them out. Previously, I worked at a company that did like genetic testing. So the kind of data that patients like would receive is like, you know, risk for cancer, risk for heart disease. And if you give that data like to the patient, like as raw data, like it'll really stress them out. They'll be like, oh my God, like I'm going to get cancer. So I think empowering patients with their data, like a lot of the times I feel like, especially for things like genetic testing, it requires kind of like adding that barrier or like that kind of buffer of like education or like a touch point with the provider so that they know what's going on, but they're also not freaking out about it. So what we found helped was they wouldn't just get their data, they would kind of have a touch point with the provider to explain their data to them. I also don't know how scalable that is because that requires a doctor talking to a patient every single time you get data, but we found that that was kind of like, yeah, you don't want your patients to freak out about their data because not everyone has access to that clinical education straight away.
There's really interesting discussions around that with open notes. I don't know if anyone has been part of that at any healthcare institutions, but there's a lot of fear on the doctor and healthcare provider side that if patients could see their notes or if patients can immediately get the results that they'll freak out. And I think that scalability thing of having the touch point with the doctor before releasing data to the patients, that has just proved to be, that's where like things get lost in translation, or maybe patients don't get their results in time. So there's a whole kind of movement to kind of open up health data and make sure patients always have access, but providing that translation layer, even if that has to be automated, could potentially help offset some of the fear and help people really understand what their chances are of certain things.
Yeah, I think it's a balance of educating your patient, but also not letting them freak out, because sometimes, you know, a lab test result is a combination of many factors that, you know, taken singularly, you might see a lab test result and it would cause an emotional reaction because it's stressful, but that's something that's automated, not considering the whole context. So I think that the context that a doctor or provider provides is really crucial.
Oh, that's interesting, Elena. Will you say more about that?
Yeah, lots of interesting conversation going on in the chat. So if anyone,
Yeah, I would imagine, like, from a provider perspective, like, because I also come from a healthcare background, and a lot of there's some patients who, you know, would go to WebMD. I don't know if WebMD is still in use nowadays, and it seems like ChatGPT is replacing it, but it's like there, you know, it's ChatGPT or WebMD is going to spew some kind of information that's not considering your whole entire, like it doesn't have a holistic view on you. So is that really that great of a thing to go onto ChatGPT and like look up your lab test results? I think
Yes. Have you
it's
done it?
It's good for understanding information and understanding the context, but ChatGPT is not your doctor.
It will be. So right now, yeah, it makes some things up, but over time it will be. You can see what's happening. Stanford's LLM version with it's more clinically oriented. Pretty freaking phenomenal. Even ChatGPT now, if you've done like a whole, what did we do last week? It was like a whole colitis thing. Hey, I'm going camping. I have colitis. WTF, right? What do I do? There's no bathrooms, right? And I had two clinicians looking over my shoulder when we did this, and they were freaked out. They're like, "Oh my God, this is way more than I give any patient." So, I mean, it's getting there. So yes, Olga, I agree. It's, is it a perfect? Hell no. Is it going to get better over, the next year, next 6 months? It's in the speed at which it's getting better too is insane. And so I think we can expect that to be a service that will be very, very good for both clinicians and patients. Now there's also like of course, ethic and AI. That's a whole separate conversation. But over time, your LLM for you will fit on your Android or iPhone completely. So it'll be completely model based on you only. And I think that is a component to this, which is going to be completely rad as well for those who don't have internet connections very well or have intermittent connections. And then it'll be able to adjust based on your level of, of understanding, like in real time. That to me is also pretty rad.
Yeah, this past week, I think it can be rad, but I think certain health systems are taking a slow pause or approach to it. I work at a health system right now, and we just had a new policy come out last week. And they said, the product, it has potential, but as of September 1st, they're prohibiting access to all AI GPT products. And they formed a council, a task force to explore solutions and stuff. So they're easing into it. But as of now, anything on the network, on the hospital network, those would be blocked or restricted. So, I mean, yeah, it's interesting to see the different approaches that different health systems are taking, and as early adopters or not.
I was just gonna say, Yuhan, like this feels a lot like schools where I feel like I can understand why you would block it while like the LMs are still hallucinating, whatever. But because like this is going to be in our future, right? And I think by blocking and not having people access it, use it, test it, be familiar with it, you're creating this like weird mystique or whatever difference between humans and machines that isn't good. That's a reaction on that. The other comment related to like lab results, and I think something Elena said in the chat that's also relevant with LLMs is like having ChatGPT help you provide context when you can't reach a doctor yet, to that scale problem. Like I was just listening to this podcast about lab results and like the issues with having such strict thresholds. Like for example, the one that the like diagnosis they were using is when you're type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or pre-diabetic. I don't know if there's any clinicians in this room, please correct me if I'm wrong, but like that pre-diabetic diagnosis is based on like a hard cutoff threshold at like 36 coming back from your LDL results or something like that. Whereas like at 37, you're diabetic, at 36, you're pre-diabetic, but it's not like that 1 point indifference should be the determining factor of like whether you should change your behavior or not. Like between 33 and 36, you should probably be changing something about your diet or exercise or whatever it is that you need. But someone who like gets that diagnosis off the bat, that'd be very scary. Whereas like if you could put that into a ChatGPT or whatever before you can get access to a doctor and provide you the context on what that means for you as like a triage point, I think would do so much for a person's like ability to react to those results.
I kind of feel a lot of people don't have access or control of their own health. So just having I think I'm trying to be self-critical here. How can patients be more empowered by their health data? And I'm trying to question, when people don't have control over their own health, what does that empowerment, where does that empowerment come? by getting the health data. So like you talk about diabetes, but it's a lot of different factors. It's not a score that informs me and therefore I make lifestyle changes. There's a lot more going on. And oftentimes I don't have, like I have worked in clinics where patients, STI patients came and said, yeah, I will take safer sex behaviors, I'm high risk, blah, blah, blah. The minute they go out, they are in a abusive relationship. They are not in control of their health. Somebody else is in control of their health. Or if I'm diabetic and I'm pregnant in India, I was asked to eat and sleep all the time. And if one of I've worked in remote places, in remote rural areas where women don't have control over their own health, we were making a mobile app, a dialogic approach to, so that this maternal health, women are able to take control of their own health, but their husbands and their mother-in-laws are sitting around them to make decisions for them. So a lot of the times people don't have that control. So when we talk about is it empowering people, we have to also talk about the circumstances and the context. So it is not just about getting one information. It's a lot more other things that going on that we have to address, even as software developers or people developing this data.
This is not a fully formed thought, so thank you in advance to everyone who's about to come on this journey with me. But one thing that I think this brings up for me is the question about ChatGPT's training data, for example, right? Which of course is like one of the big questions about these LLMs in general. And Johan, I haven't played with this too much as it relates to sort of like, if I were to put in a molecular profiling report or like a series of blood tests that I got back, how it would respond to me. But I think one thing that I find interesting is thinking about the perspective from which ChatGPT might be analyzing, or I don't know if it makes recommendations yet, or if some of these LLMs make recommendations yet, but is this based on Western medicine? Is this based on Eastern medicine? Is this based on homeopathic medicine? Is there a good mix of all? I think that like the way that ChatGPT privileges certain kinds of information based on the training data it's been given, based on the information on the internet and how that's prioritized and who has access to that, and what have you, is also something really interesting to think about as we start to put more trust in these LLMs. I was listening to an article recently about all of these patent wars that are happening because you will have these drug companies that will discover the benefits of turmeric. And then you will have Ayurvedic doctors in India say, like, we've been doing this for thousands of years. You don't get to patent this, right? So there are all these patent wars coming up because there's a lot of knowledge that traditional and native cultures have that has not been put on the internet. And there's a big push to do that now. But that's all that stuff that ChatGPT doesn't have access to. And so we're sort of reinforcing this pattern where like a certain kind of information, a certain kind of knowledge gets privileged through these LLMs. And then it sort of gets into this loop that it just, again, reinforces itself and reinforces itself. So again, not a fully formed thought, but curious to hear anybody else's thinking about the same thing.
I think it brings a really interesting point. I mean, this is kind of derailing from, I think, health in general, but I think with the centralization of everything online, it's kind of forcing like societies and globalization, because it's like if you don't upload it to the internet, it sometimes is assumed that it doesn't exist or like you don't have ownership over it. And so I feel like this kind of crosses beyond just healthcare and like cultural medicine. Like this also applies to a lot of other ideas such as like storytelling, like trying to think of other things that might be of similar vein. But I do think that this is a very interesting insight, and I think it kind of crosses boundaries beyond just healthcare in general.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I just wanted to pop in to just say that basically. But Anupama, your points, and Elena, your examples, Josephine, obviously your comments as well. I think those really important to remember.
I don't know a lot about LLMs and GPT and everything, but it seems like there's a really interesting collision between potentially the personal LLM and the LLM, like whatever is giving the advice, because there's sort of like, I thought that was an interesting point about, is it Eastern medicine, Western medicine? And a lot of that seems to depend on the person themselves and their personal preferences. And so if there's some way to kind of give that advice, reading the person and make it completely personalized to them, that seems like it would be most appropriate. It's fascinating.
Johan, can you say more about that last point you just made in the chat?
About machines, the statistic on diagnosing rate, that one?
No, about, oh, sorry, this is Julie. Sorry.
Okay.
The text is too small for me. Julie, can you say more about this last point? Named after like the instruments named after a particular person?
Oh yeah, so just to, I guess, bounce off of Elena's sort of comment about patenting, I guess, information on, I guess, Western medicine, homeopathy and such, how there's so many variations of people doing it for thousands of years versus not doing it. Yeah, no, I feel like it's repurposed and rebranded. So if you ever seen, like, whenever you mention the example of turmeric, it's sort of in India, it's branded a certain way and it's like homeopathy over there, from my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but then over here in America, it's like you either get them in the small capsules, and the almond moms are the one who are advertising it, and you can see the people with their energy shots. So I think that it's saturated in our culture socially, in general, but also whenever you bring it back to, like, roll it back to healthcare, it's sort of the same way in, like, medical practice as well. Now, some of the trends that I see is branching off from not just medical care, but also like PT, OT. Some specific examples would be like pelvic medicine. A lot of pelvic medicine has been practiced long before it was called pelvic healthcare, but now there are DPTs practicing this particular I guess, physical therapy for not only pregnant women, but also women who have, and men who have incontinence and such. So I think that it's not just also products, but also practice. And it's been happening for a while, but to see the development in sort of like AI would be interesting as well.
I'm kind of curious. I believe most of us, if not all of us, are stateside at the moment, but Velen, you're currently in Singapore, where it's 2 a.m. So thank you for staying on. But what's your like reaction to some of the conversation happening here, and like what's your experience?
Honestly speaking, right from the get-go, I was pretty resistant towards having AI access all this different health data and even doing any diagnosis about it. But while we were working on a feature on our product, basically it's when we are running through diagnostic health tests, diagnostic tests, the biomarkers that return, supposedly we wanted a doctor to have a way to put in their doctor's notes. But our CTO actually tried out using chat the lab results, but of course it's not the real patients themselves, it's our own lab reports just to do a trial. And in actual fact, the diagnosis and even the recommendations that it turns out is pretty accurate and pretty shocking. We even have it printed out and checked with some of our doctor partners. So yeah, I think after that episode, I think it's more believable, and I think over time it's just gonna get better and better.
There is an interesting chat happening about creating purposeful friction in experiences, but ensuring we don't cross the line between dark practices, dark patterns, etc. This kind of leads into another question that I had actually for the agenda, which is there was a really interesting discussion last design rounds where I asked, like, what are examples of places where people have seen delightful experiences? And one of the attendees made a really good call out that says, like, should we be focusing on delightful experiences when so much of the healthcare experience feels broken? Like, should we just be getting ourselves to a practice of good and a practice of not bad and hating most experiences? Like, what does good versus delightful look like? And I'm kind of curious for everyone's thoughts on, like, either whether this is like based on, or whether this is like full-fledged service design experiences you guys have had, or particular features or interactions, etc. But just what are people's thoughts on that difference between having delightful versus having good, and examples of them? Or just your thoughts on what you think of that statement, like, we shouldn't focus on delight yet, we need to focus on good.
I can go. I think one thing I've kind of realized when working in like design side of health tech or tech in general, I feel like people who work in tech are like really biased towards like using building tech to solve problems, but I don't think that's always the best like course of action. I feel like the best, I feel like with designers in health tech specifically, you should always approach the problem of like, how can we make this as low code of a solution as possible, right? The solution isn't always to like create a new design. So I think the difference between like good and functional design and like delightful design, like, yeah, it can look nice, it can like work really well, but like, is this like process, is this like a smooth process? So I think like designers, especially in health tech, if you really involve yourself on like the ops side of things, and like the delivery side of things, I feel like that really helps you like understand like where tech is needed and where it's just like you're just like building extra.
I think I agree to that, and I kind of remember suddenly anecdote from another user researcher 10 years ago. She was working in Sweden developing a health app. I think this was giving information about their after cancer diagnosis, and they realized that it is not about getting the data on the app that was the user goal. The user goal was that tension, reducing that waiting time, and that resolved their problem. Having cancer or not wasn't their stress. They just wanted to know quickly whether they have it and what to do about it, or they don't. And a lot of times, health information is not about having information on tech. In the tech world, we think every solution has a tech solution, or whether to make it look good or make it bad. But a lot of it is about the interaction with the clinicians, being in the hospital, and a lot of it is non-tech. And those are things that tech cannot replace. And I kind of feel that that is where, if it needs to look bad, it's okay sometimes. But are we in the tech world ready to give in and say, okay, it's okay to be the ugly look it has, but still it works? So that's kind of the question we need to ask ourselves, I think.
Kind of echoing both sentiments that have been shared. Previously, I was working at this nonprofit kind of state-funded platform for Medicaid matching for caregivers and care seekers. And one thing that I think that problem space really highlighted was the fact that tech is really, sometimes it's really difficult to bring delight into the problem space because there's such a lack of delight, and also there's so many broken systems. And so in that case, when we were trying to, essentially the state was saying like, oh, you have this piece of technology, can you build it out more so that we can reduce the time it takes between caregivers and care seekers to connect with each other? And what we found was that it's really hard to use tech to replace that because there's so much human interaction that's nuanced, and it's very up to like personal preference. And there's just so many factors that whatever you're trying to build is not going to fully encompass that. And through that process, we were actually able to collect metrics instead to show to the state, like, hey, this problem can't really be solved. Like, I think you should just add more funding if possible. Or like, it was kind of leveraged to further show that the human interaction component of healthcare is really important. Like, that is where you should invest more into it.
Thanks, Josephine. I think that's a inspiring and great comment to leave on. We're right on the dot here. Thank you guys so much for joining. This was such an awesome conversation, very lively, and I appreciate everyone chiming in. I will send out a feedback form because as a good designer, we want everything as a product and we want to improve everything. We won't, or I won't be able to host a session in October as I'll be out of office during that week. And I figured rather than rescheduling it to be really close to the next session, we'll regroup in November. So hopefully see many of you there. If not, well, hope to see you at the December one. Well, thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful rest of your short weeks. See you guys later.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.